Hi, my name is Patty, and I started this channel, Life Uncomplicated, to help people uncomplicate their lives from a mental well-being, mental health point of view. And today I wanted to basically tell my story. The other day I had met with someone who had asked me, how did you get here? How did you get to the point where you're facilitating grief groups and you're coaching people and you're sharing with people the three principles uh, that you share? I mean, you can call it three principles of well-being. You can call it the three principles of the human dimension, the three principles of human experience. Doesn't matter what you call it. Um, but she really was interested in how did I get to this point. And so I told her, I said, well, it's a long story, but I'd be happy to share it with you. And, she said yes. And I guess for me, what I've noticed in being in group situations or even just listening to someone tell their story is there's an opportunity for people to connect to that story and to realize things like, I'm not the only one. Or maybe you hear something in someone's story that resonates with you and gets you reflective on yourself. And maybe you can see something about yourself by listening to someone else's story. I see that in all kinds of different groups that I'm in, both that I'm facilitating and that I'm a member of. And so I figured, well, if I'm going to be out here talking about, you know, uncomplicating people's lives from a mental well-being, mental health point of view, it might be helpful to know why I'm doing that. And so my story regarding this particular topic started on February 12th, 2012, when my 20-year-old son, Aaron, took his own life. And there was quite a few months before that where we were kind of helping him navigate his own mental health. Um, and this story is not about that. Maybe someday I'll tell that story, but really this story is about what happened after. And what happened after was I left my marriage of 18 years. I went out on my own. I decided, or I believed, that I couldn't grieve or mourn the way I needed to unless I was on my own. And it was necessary, I think, at that point, for me to discover a lot of things. One of which was, who am I now that my son is gone? Am I still a mother? That was a question I asked myself. Um, I had to go through a lot. I had to get through the deepest part of the grief. I had to figure out how to move forward, you know. And about 6 years after he passed, no, not 6 years after he passed, sorry, in 2016, about 4 years after he passed, I had this realization that I was kind of in the depths of my own negative thinking and thinking that perhaps he had the right idea. But luckily, this thing that I now call wisdom nudged me and said, no, 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 this is not what you want to do, your friends and family. So having gone through therapy after my son passed away, I knew therapy wasn't the way I wanted to go. And so I said, well, the only other thing I could think of to do to find a better way was to start reading self-help books. And in my mind, people that read self-help books were kind of pathetic. And I was embarrassed to admit that I'd be going the route of the self-help book. Now, I want to clarify now by saying, just because that was my belief at the moment doesn't mean it was true. And I soon found out that it wasn't true. But that's where I was in that moment, right? So I was doing a lot of traveling for work at that time, and I was listening to a lot of audiobooks. So I thought, well, I'll go on to Audible and I'll try to find the most down-to-earth sounding self-help book, and I will listen to that. And I came across a book by a man called Mark Manson, and the book was The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. Fill in the F for yourself. And I bought the book, I downloaded it. And it took me a while, probably took me 3 months before I actually listened to the book. But I finally got my courage up and I hit play, and the book changed my life. It really, really did. I don't mean that in any light sort of way. Because I heard things in that book, as I said earlier, when you hear people's stories, you realize you're not the only one. And you realize you're not the only, I realized I wasn't the only human who was suffering from my own negative thinking. Let's just put it that way. And I heard a couple things in that book that really have stuck with me. One paragraph he wrote, one chapter he wrote was, "You are not special." That was very impactful for me, that particular chapter. And let's just say one book led to another. And I had joined a gym at this point. I'd gone to a Christmas party. We did this Yankee swap. And if you know what a Yankee swap is, you bring a gift, you pick numbers, everybody swaps gifts. And if you like the gift someone else got, you can take it away from them and so forth. At the end of the day, I wound up with this gift pack. And in the box was a book by Jen Sincero called You Are a Badass. Well, I still wasn't super comfortable with the whole self-help book thing, even though I had listened to many of them and they had been impactful. So this book sat on my table for a while, maybe a month or two. And then I thought, well, maybe it's on Audible. I'll listen to it on Audible. And I downloaded it. A little while later, I started it. And within the first chapter, she starts talking about spirituality. And that was it for me. I shut it off. I'm like, no, I'm not going to listen to it. Because I still had it in my mind that spirituality and religion were the same thing. And as far as I was concerned, I had no use for God. God had taken my son away from me. Not my God, but God had, let this happen. And I didn't want anything to do with it. So, as I told you, I belong to this gym. A friend of mine who is a Reiki master was doing a presentation, and she said, "I'd love you to come." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'll come, no problem." And I did, and I sat there and I listened to her, and she started to talk about spirituality in a way that wasn't religious. It was in a way that spiritual is energy, the energy of life, the energy that we are. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I can kind of wrap my head around this." And I was like, "Well, maybe I'll listen to that book." So I listened to Jen's book, and again found a lot in it that I resonated with, a lot that was very helpful for me. Once I got past that spiritual bit, it wasn't about religion anymore. It was about just the energy of life and who we are other than our physical bodies. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay with this. And in the book and in other books I had read, I kept hearing a couple of messages: get a coach and meditate. Right? Both of which, again, I was kind of resistant to almost every step of the journey. I'm sure you're catching that on to this, right? But I'm like, okay, the meditation bit, we'll give it a go. And one of the things Jen Sincero said in a book is, if you're not familiar with meditation, do a group meditation. And one of the ways you can find group meditations in your area is go to a local health food store and see what's posted there. So I did. I went to my local health food store, and posted there was this woman's circle, new moon circle, and they met once a month during the new moon. And again, I was resistant, but I'm trying to find my way here. So I'm like, okay, this is where I'm been brought. This is what I'm going to do. And I went. It happened to be happening that night. I registered. I went. The woman who ran it, she was a coach, and she worked with women, and she was also kind of into this more spiritual dimension, if you will. And some of what she had to share resonated with me, some of it didn't. But at the end of the night, she had us lay down in like a circle. So we're laying, so our feet are in the circle. There's probably 15 of us, and we're all laying around the outside with our heads pointing out and our feet pointing in toward the circle. And she said, "All right, I'm going to take you on a journey to meet your hierophant, which is your wiser self, that part of you that knows more than you do. And so we all laying down and it's dark and quiet and she's like having us imagine that we're going through these woods and we come to a meadow and we're going through the meadow, walking through the meadow, and we walk up a hill, and at the top of the hill there's a pond. And at the pond, it's very settled. It's like a mirror. And you're going to look over the edge of the pond and you're going to see a version of yourself that's older and wiser, but it's you. And she said, and now I'm going to be quiet and I'm just going to let you listen and see what comes to you. And I'm laying there with a very full mind going, this is stupid. This is ridiculous. I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, why am I here? Blah, 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 blah. But then, that little nudge came in again and said, just listen, just be quiet and listen. So I did. And I laid there and I'm kind of imagining this whole scene. And then out of the blue, I heard two words that I will never forget. I heard, he's okay. Yeah, that was a big one for me. A lot of tears. I can't tell the story without my eyes tearing, but it was super impactful for me. And I realized, okay, there's something here that I'm not seeing that I need to close off my head and just go with it. So in that moment, I knew I was headed in the right direction, and I hired her as a coach for 3 sessions. It was the first coach I'd ever worked with. And from there, I was listening to more books. I was getting more ideas. Things were resonating with me. I will be very honest. I kept going into books because I kept looking for the answer, like the answer that was going to fix me. But it just kept leading to another book and another book and another book. But in the midst of all this, um, I don't even remember how I came up against it, but there was an advertisement for a life coach who was doing a presentation at a Staples about 2 hours away from me, and I signed up and I went because she was the first life coach that I knew about outside of the woman who did the circle. And I went and I met her and she did her presentation and I really loved what she had to say, and I started following her and set up some coaching sessions with her, and I was like, I love this coaching thing and I want to investigate. I want to go that direction. Well, I hired her and she basically helped me make a website, and she was lovely, but she introduced me to her mentor, who was a coach who helped people tell their story for their businesses. And so I signed on with her for a few months and learned how to kind of tell my story and talk about my story, which was super helpful. And on our last session, she introduced us to a man who actually lived in Australia, who was a presenting mentor. And there was something about him that I just really loved. And he would talk about speaking from the heart brain. And again, it's so fascinating where you see that it's all the same thing. Not listening to this more, speaking from here, not speaking from here. And that's what the woman who taught us to tell our stories was telling us. Don't think about it too much, just tell the story, right? And anyway, so I signed on with him for a little while. I think I was 6 months, and met a lot of people in that group. It was great. And they kept telling me about a woman called Brooke Castillo who runs something called the Life Coach School. And so I, again, persistently started listening to her podcast. And that was the first time that I heard your thoughts create your feelings. I had never heard that before. And I followed her for a couple of years. And, we're getting into years here. And so 2018, 2019, I started listening to her podcast. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to train with her to be a coach. She trains coaches. I didn't know if I wanted to go that direction, but I liked what she had to share, but I felt like there was something missing. And so I decided to sign on with her, one of her coaches, to see, is this the path? Is it my path? Like there was something in me that was saying yes, but no, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. So I I signed on with this particular coach. It was during the pandemic, as it turns out. And I realized during that time with her that uh, I figured it out. I figured out what was missing. And I didn't figure it out through the coaching with her. I actually figured it out because I was on YouTube during this process, and I came upon a man named Michael Beckwith. And you might know the name Michael Beckwith. This is Black man. He's a spiritual teacher. He runs a spiritual center in California called Agape. He's been on Oprah. He's good friends with Oprah. He's out there in the mainstream. But I was listening to him do a sermon, and he said something that really resonated with me, which was, he said, what I heard him say was, God is not a mythical man in the sky. God is a presence that's never an absence. And I realized that all of this books and the teachers and my friend were all saying the same thing, right? There's just this presence that's always there, whether we know it or not. Some people call that God. And I was like, okay, now I'm wrapping my head around this. Now I'm feeling into it. And I still wanted to be a coach. I still wanted to help people. I'd already started a grief support group. The first one I'd started, I'd showed up. Nobody showed up for it yet, but I was trying. And I'm sitting on the bed one night and I'm watching Michael Beckwith. This was sometime later. And I heard that bloody nudge again that said, be a spiritual teacher. And I'm like, no effing way. Up until very recently, I couldn't even say the word spiritual. Never mind be a spiritual teacher. What are you talking about? But I heard the voice again very clearly say, be a spiritual teacher. So I'm sitting on my bed, I'm looking up at my ceiling, and I'm like, all right, you show me how to be a spiritual teacher and a coach, and I'm in. And I kid you not, the very next day, there is a feed, a advertisement in my Google feed for a guy called Michael Neal, who is offering a free training on how to coach executives. I'm like, all right, coaching executives is not what I want to do, but clearly, here's my next step. I should take it. So I listened to the masterclass, and it was brilliant. And it wasn't so much about, the coaching executives. That's not where I wanted to go. But I realized that there was something that this guy had to offer. So I started watching his YouTube videos. I started listening to old copies of his radio show. I became a member of one of his sites, all those things. And he teaches from the three principles. So I realized what was missing in the Thoughts Create Your Feelings from the Life Coach School is there is this presence that's never an absence. There is this place inside every one of us where our experience comes from, that if we look there, we will find our answers when we have a quiet mind, when we're not too caught up in our thinking. And when I look back on my journey, I realized that's exactly what had happened to me every step of the way. The night my son passed away, I was sitting on his bed, and the EMT came in. Happened to be somebody I've known for years. But he sat on the bed next to me and he said, I can give you something for the pain if you'd like. And I said to him, no, I have to feel every bit of this pain. I need to experience this no matter what. Because I felt like I needed to get a little inkling of what, and there's my cat, what my son had felt. I just needed to be in that space. And I don't think I knew that on an intellectual level. I think I knew that on a soul level. Let me grab the ball. And so I guess what I'm getting at is my story and my journey and why I'm here is because understanding that spiritual bit of us is what I believe to be taking us to our own inner well-being. It's where it exists all the time, even in the face of loss, even in the face of suicidal thinking, even in the face of believing you're not good enough or having reservations about even being able to see the words, say the word spiritual, or dive into self-help books if in your little intellectual head it's telling you, no, you shouldn't do that. That's for losers. There's a bit of us that knows better. And when we tune into that bit, life's not hard. It's not complicated. We have our things that we go through in life, but there's a bit of us that guides us through it. I guess that's what I'm saying. And I guess that's why I wanted to share this story. Because what I've noticed in people in my grief groups that I facilitate is when they catch a glimpse of that, when they see that for themselves, their lives start to change. And I am absolutely confident that that's how it works. So that's my story on how I got here. And I hope it's helpful for you. I hope something in it resonates for you. If you listen to the end, thank you for hanging out with me because it was a bit of a long story. But there it is. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm sharing what I share. And I hope it's helpful for you. Other than that, I will come out another time when I have something else to share. And in the meantime, be well. Take care.